Hey everyone, welcome back to our channel where we dive deep into the lives and philosophies of some of the most influential thinkers in history. Today we're exploring the life and work of John Stuart Mill, a towering figure in liberal political philosophy. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, and let's get right into the story of a man whose ideas continue to resonate in our quest for freedom and equality. Born on May 20th, 1806, in London, England, John Stuart Mill's life was nothing short of a novel written by the hand of discipline and intellectual rigor. His father, James Mill, a close friend of the utilitarian philosopher Jeremy Bentham, took charge of young John's education, exposing him to a rigorous and highly disciplined schooling. By the age of 3, John was learning Greek, and by 8, he had read Aesop's Fables, Xenophon's Anabasis, and Herodotus, setting the stage for a prodigious understanding of human affairs. John's childhood was unlike any other. It was devoid of what we would consider normal childhood play. Instead, it was filled with structured learning and explorations into economics, logic, and philosophical principles. By adolescence, John was already a formidable intellectual force, assisting his father in the promotion of utilitarianism, a philosophy advocating for the greatest happiness of the greatest number. Despite his profound education, John experienced what he later described as a mental crisis at 20. He questioned the foundation of his happiness and the utilitarian philosophy he had been indoctrinated into. It was during this period that he discovered the works of romantic poets like Wordsworth and Coleridge, which helped him to see the importance of emotions and individuality in one's life. John Stuart Mill's contributions to philosophy, economics, and political theory are vast. His most notable works include On Liberty, Utilitarianism, The Subjection of Women, and Principles of Political Economy. Through these texts, Mill explored ideas that challenged the conventions of his day and laid the groundwork for modern liberal thought. In On Liberty, Mill passionately defends the freedom of expression, stating that society has no right to silence any opinion, no matter how unpopular. This work is often cited for its profound influence on the development of personal liberty and free speech rights in Western societies. One of his most famous quotes from this book is, "He who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that." Mill's utilitarianism further elaborates on the ethical theory promoted by his father and Bentham, but with significant refinements. He emphasized the qualitative differences in pleasures, arguing that intellectual and moral pleasures, higher pleasures, are superior to more base forms of pleasure, lower pleasures. The Subjection of Women is another groundbreaking work where Mill argues for equality between the sexes, an idea far ahead of his time. He famously stated, "The legal subordination of one sex to another is wrong in itself, and now one of the chief hindrances to human improvement." Key quotes and insights. A person may cause evil to others not only by his actions but by his inaction, and in either case, he is justly accountable to them for the injury. This highlights Mill's belief in the responsibility we all carry, not just for our actions but also for our inactions. Over himself, over his own body and mind, the individual is sovereign. From On Liberty, emphasizing the fundamental principle of personal autonomy. I did not mean that conservatives are generally stupid. I meant that stupid persons are generally conservative. I believe that to be so obvious and undeniable a fact that I hardly think any honorable gentleman will question it. A sharp critique reflecting his views on conservatism and intelligence. The only freedom which deserves the name is that of pursuing our own good in our own way, so long as we do not attempt to deprive others of theirs or impede their efforts to obtain it. An eloquent statement on the essence of liberty. War is an ugly thing, but not the ugliest of things. The decayed and degraded state of moral and patriotic feeling which thinks that nothing is worth a war is much worse. Reflecting his nuanced view on conflict and morality. On Liberty by John Stuart Mill is a seminal work that addresses the nature and limits of the power that can be legitimately exercised by society over the individual. Mill argues for the importance of individuality, which he considers a prerequisite to higher pleasures. The book is divided into 5 chapters, each exploring different facets of the liberty concept. The first chapter, introductory, sets the stage by discussing the struggle between liberty and authority, historically manifested as a battle between subjects and rulers. Mill proposes that as society progresses, it faces a new dilemma, the tyranny of the majority. Here he introduces the thesis that only the harm principle justifies exercising power over any member of a civilized community against their will. In the second chapter, Of the Liberty of Thought and Discussion, Mill argues that silencing an opinion is a peculiar evil. He suggests that if a silenced opinion is right, society is deprived of the truth. If wrong, it loses the clearer perception and livelier impression of truth, produced by its collision with error. He emphasizes the importance of dissent and suggests that no opinion is completely wrong, but rather may contain a portion of the truth. The third chapter, Of Individuality as one of the elements of well-being, advocates for the individual's freedom to pursue their own good in their own way. Mill stresses that individuality is one of the essentials of well-being, and that it should not be impeded by social conformity. The cultivation of individuality fosters a well-developed individual and ultimately produces greater happiness for society. In the fourth chapter, Of the Limits to the Authority of Society over the Individual, Mill discusses the appropriate level of authority that society should have over the individual. He argues that the individual's actions should only be limited when they harm others. Self-regarding actions, which only affect the individual committing them, should not be subject to societal coercion or control. Mill outlines various types of actions and discusses the appropriate level of intervention for each. The final chapter, Applications, provides practical applications of the principles discussed in previous chapters. Mill examines cases such as the regulation of trade, the consumption of alcohol, and the enforcement of religious or moral views on others. He consistently argues that unless harm to others is demonstrated, the state and society have no legitimate interest in controlling individual behavior. Throughout On Liberty, Mill passionately defends individual freedom as essential to societal progress and improvement. His advocacy for liberty, reasoned debate, and individuality laid the groundwork for modern democratic, civil, and human rights. His work remains a crucial point of reference in discussions about personal freedom versus societal control. Utilitarianism by John Stuart Mill is a philosophical essay first published in 1861, in which Mill provides support for the utilitarian ethical theory proposed by Jeremy Bentham. In this work, Mill expands upon the ideas of utilitarianism, which argues that actions are right insofar as they promote happiness and wrong as they produce the opposite of happiness. Happiness is defined by Mill as pleasure and the absence of pain. The essay is divided into 5 chapters, each addressing different aspects of utilitarianism and responding to common criticisms against the theory. In the first chapter, Mill sets out the fundamental principle of ethics, which is the principle of utility, or the greatest happiness principle. This principle holds that actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness and wrong as they tend to produce the reverse of happiness. Mill emphasizes that this happiness is not solely the agent's own happiness, but the happiness of all concerned. The second chapter, What Utilitarianism Is, responds to misconceptions about utilitarianism. Mill argues against the common interpretation that utilitarianism values only the base pleasures. Instead, he introduces a qualitative distinction between higher, intellectual, and moral, and lower bodily pleasures, stating that it is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. The third chapter, Of the Ultimate Sanction of the Principle of Utility, explores the motivation behind adhering to the utilitarian standard. Mill discusses the internal and external sanctions or motivations that can compel individuals to adhere to utilitarian ethics, the internal sanction being one's conscience, and the external sanction being external pressures such as legal penalties and social disapproval. In the fourth chapter, Of What Sort of Proof? The principle of utility is susceptible. Mill addresses the proof for the principle of utility. He argues that the only proof that something is desirable is that people do actually desire it. For utilitarianism, the ultimate end of human action is generally acknowledged to be happiness. Therefore, we can conclude that happiness is desirable as an end in itself. The final chapter, On the Connection Between Justice and Utility, Mill discusses the relationship between justice and utility, acknowledging that justice poses the greatest obstacle to utilitarianism. He argues that the sentiment of justice is based on utility and that rights exist only because they are necessary for human happiness. The chapter discusses various aspects of justice, including punishment and rights, and demonstrates how these concepts fit into the utilitarian framework. Throughout utilitarianism, Mill is concerned with defending utilitarianism as a practical and morally sophisticated ethical framework, rather than merely a simple calculation of pleasures and pains. His distinctions between higher and lower pleasures are aimed at responding to critics who view utilitarianism as a doctrine fit for swine, and his discussions on justice aim to integrate deeply held human sentiments into the utilitarian perspective. The Subjection of Women by John Stuart Mill, first published in 1869, is a groundbreaking work advocating for gender equality. Written in collaboration with his wife, Harriet Taylor Mill, the essay is a powerful argument against the legal and social inequalities that women faced during the 19th century. Mill argues that the subjugation of women is a relic of the past and an obstacle to human progress. The essay is structured into 4 chapters, each addressing different aspects of women's subjection and the arguments for their emancipation. In Leo, the first chapter, Mill discusses the legal and social subordination of women, drawing a parallel with slavery. He argues that society has traditionally placed women in a position of inferiority, treating them as property rather than individuals with their own rights. This objection is maintained not through inherent differences between men and women, but through social and educational constraints that deny women opportunities to develop their capacities. The second chapter explores the nature of the inequality between the sexes. Mill refutes the argument that women are naturally inferior to men in mental and physical capacities. He claims that any apparent differences are the result of societal conditioning rather than innate qualities. Mill also argues that both men and women would benefit from equality, as it would promote moral and intellectual advancement, leading to a healthier and more productive society. In the third chapter, Mill examines the practical implications of denying equality to women. He points out that society loses out on the potential contributions of half its members when women are confined to the roles of wives and mothers. Mill suggests that allowing women to compete freely in all societal roles would lead to higher overall levels of achievement. He also discusses marriage, advocating for a partnership based on mutual respect and equality, rather than dominance and subordination. The final chapter addresses the objections to women's emancipation, such as the claim that women are naturally suited for domestic roles. Mill counters these arguments by emphasizing the importance of individual choice and the variability of human capacities. He urges for social and legal reforms that would grant women the same rights as men, including the right to vote, the right to education, and the right to participate fully in economic and political life. The subjection of women is notable for its ahead-of-its-time advocacy for gender equality. Mill's arguments are based on principles of justice and utility, asserting that the subjection of any group is morally wrong and socially inefficient. He champions the individual rights of women and calls for structural changes to uplift their status in society, making a compelling case that the liberation of women is essential for the progress and well-being of all humanity. Thanks for tuning into today's deep dive into the life and philosophy of John Stuart Mill. If you found these insights enlightening, don't forget to like, comment, and share this video. What do you think about Mill's ideas on liberty and equality? Let us know in the comments below. Remember to subscribe for more thought-provoking content. See you in the next video.